Hello, I'm Dan Heber, and this is the lecture video to accompany the readings for Maurice Merleau-Ponty. And before I get into the material from the text, I wanted to frame this discussion a little bit because it kind of seems at first glance that we're working our way backward in time from where we left off last time. The most recent thing we discussed was Paul and Patricia Churchland's theory of eliminative materialism, and they're both still alive, and they're both still, researching and producing works of philosophy in this area. And what we're doing today, in this lecture video rather, is discussing portions of the arguments that Maurice Merleau-Ponty produced in 1945. So it kind of seems like we're jumping backwards in history about 70 or so years. And on the surface level, that's true. Obviously, if we're looking at the arguments from a text from 1945, that is going backwards in time. But the reason why we're looking at Maurice Merleau-Ponty at the end of this unit is because he is sort of looking backwards and explaining what he thinks is wrong with the viewpoint of dualism. But he's also anticipating arguments that we would see come about in the early 2000s. Arguments that go by philosophical positions rather that go by the name of emergentism and embodied cognition. Those are very recent theories in the field of the philosophy of mind, and we see all of those ideas anticipated in Maurice Merleau-Ponty. So that's why we're looking at Maurice Merleau-Ponty at the end of this section, because it's sort of both acting as a review of some of these ideas that we've already discussed, and also he's giving us a representation of ideas that are still being discussed in today's arena by today's top researchers. So these opening paragraphs here by John Chafee, the author and editor of your textbook, he is giving us an overview of what Maurice Merleau-Ponty is saying and the historical positioning of him in the 1940s. He was very much influenced by this prior German philosopher, a guy by the name of Edmund Husserl, who was the progenitor of this mode of philosophy, the style of philosophy that we call phenomenology, more specifically the phenomenological reduction. And what Maurice Merleau-Ponty does is, rather than try to give a discussion of the ontology of what mind is, he wants to talk about the experience of consciousness itself. So go back to what we mean by a phenomena, the phenomena versus noumena. The noumena, of course, this is language introduced by Kant in the late 1700s. Remember, the noumena is the thing in of itself, and the phenomena is the perception of, or the awareness of, objects. So phenomenology more generally simply means the study of those perceptions. So we're just sort of going to bracket, I use that term phenomenological bracketing, we're going to bracket the discussion of what the ontology of the thing is. We're not going to ignore it, we're just going to bracket it, and we're going to set that question aside. And then what we're going to do is we're going to be focusing on our experience of consciousness itself. So Maurice Merleau-Ponty begins by rejecting Cartesian dualism. Remember, Descartes says that you are just a mind that happens to have a body. Remember that famous dictum of Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. But what is the nature of the thinking thing? Well, according to Descartes, it's this, purely ideal, spiritual, mental kind of stuff, this substance. According to Descartes, with his dualist ontology, you are just a mind that happens to have a body. You are a mind that happens to have a brain. And Maurice Merleau-Ponty rejects that out of hand. He says, no, it's like you can't separate the two. You can't separate mind from body. Maurice Merleau-Ponty regards the mind-body problem more generally as just being a pseudo-problem that results from this philosophical confusion, this attempt to split mind and body. What Maurice Merleau-Ponty says is that you are an embodied subject. You are an embodied mind. You can't separate the mind from the body. Mind and body are always going to be coming together, and they can't be teased apart. And mind and body co-constitute reality. Consciousness, again, is not disembodied, but is rooted in the lived body. The distinction that Maurice Merleau-Ponty makes, of course he was French, he was writing in the French language, is the difference between le corps objectif and le corps propre. John Chafee, the author of your textbook, he mentions, let's see, body as object. Body as object is le corps objectif. That's what Maurice Merleau-Ponty is going to be rejecting. The body as object, that is the viewpoint of some of the materialists and physicalists that we've been discussing. So we've seen how Maurice Merleau-Ponty rejects and pushes back against dualism, but he also rejects and pushes back against physicalism. What Maurice Merleau-Ponty is going to say is, well, neither of those positions are right. And where the behaviorist and where the functionalist go wrong is that they are emphasizing le corps objectif. They are acting as if we are objects in the world. But of course, to act as if we are objects in the world ignores our subjective experiences, right? What Maurice Merleau-Ponty is going to say is that we cannot understand consciousness. Remember the title of Maurice Merleau-Ponty's book, The Phenomenology of Perception. What he's wanting to do is come up with a phenomenological understanding of what consciousness is. And we don't experience the world as an object, because objects don't have experiences at all, right? They're completely inert. We obviously have a subjective experience of the world. And how do we have a subjective experience of the universe? How do we have a subjective experience of the world? Well, because we inhabit it. We inhabit it. We inhabit the universe. And how do we inhabit the universe? Well, within a lived body. And that lived body, that's the French expression, in the French language, le corps propre. The proper body is how that would literally translate. But what Maurice Merleau-Ponty actually means is the lived body. And I thought he uses the phrase the lived body, or John Chafee makes reference to that somewhere in here, and I'm not seeing it right now. I have recording blindness. As soon as I hit the record button, the stuff that I knew where it was previously. Oh, there it is. The lived body. So this phrase, the living body or the lived body, Maurice Merleau-Ponty considers that le corps propre. We don't experience the world just as an object. We experience the world as a subject, right? We are a subject in the world, and so the world is objective. It's there. But how do we experience the world? Well, we don't experience the world as an object. We experience the world as a subject. And so we're combining subjectivity and objectivity here. You cannot separate those two, because objects do not have perceptions. But we are clearly having those perceptions, and what are we perceiving? We're perceiving objects. But notice that there's other entities that inhabit the world, right? So from somebody else's perspective, I'm an object in the world, but I myself am a subject. And so what Maurice Merleau-Ponty is doing is unifying the subjective and the objective. How is it that we perceive the objective world from our subjective position? And what is our subjective position? Well, we are embodied, right? We are not these disembodied minds. We are embodied. We are experiencing the world through our bodies. So our body is not just something that we have, right? A body is not just something which is incidental to our consciousness. Our body is what makes consciousness possible. So he's not completely accepting a reductionist physicalist account here, because a reductionist physicalist account just means that we have a body as an object. But if all we have is a body as an object, well, then you don't have subjective experiences. But that belies our actual, the nature of our experience. We do have subjective experiences, but we experience the world through our consciousness, which is embodied. So, with those sort of general notes out of the way, let me sort of continue here to emphasize this difference between the objective body, le corps objectif, and the lived body, le corps propre. Now, this pink highlighted passage, I have a little star by it. And the reason I have the star by it is because I think it's important, so I'm going to be emphasizing this. I'm going to go ahead and read this pink highlighted passage here. According to Husserl and Merleau-Ponty, if we honestly and accurately examine our direct and immediate experience of ourselves, notice that's two words there, right? That's not one word. Our self. So what is the self? The self is an embodied consciousness, right? These mind-body so-called problems just fall away. As Merleau-Ponty explains, there is not a duality of substances, but only the dialectic of a living being in its biological milieu. So the world is there, right? Maurice Merleau-Ponty, unlike Descartes, who says, well, we can doubt the existence of the world, right? All we can know exists is our consciousness. Maurice Merleau-Ponty rejects that out of hand. It says, no, clearly not. It's obvious that I'm having experiences, and I'm having experience of the world. The world is just a given, and I'm in it. So now the question for Merleau-Ponty is, how do I experience the world? Well, I experience the world through an embodied consciousness. Again, I don't have this mind which is separate from the body. I don't have a body that is without consciousness. I have an embodied consciousness. So the next thing I want to point out here, this yellow highlighted passage, well, this first yellow highlighted passage is all I'm going to be talking about. The underlying question, and of course, for Merleau-Ponty, the underlying question is, what aspect of our experience is the most real? From Husserl's and Merleau-Ponty's vantage point, it's the moments of immediate pre-reflective experience that are the most real. It is the Lebenswelt. That's a German term. Of course, we're talking about Merleau-Ponty, who is French, but he is inspired by this intellectual tradition of phenomenology from this earlier German thinker, Edmund Husserl. So this German term Lebenswelt loosely translates to lived world, lived experience, right? And how do I live in the world? Well, I live in the world with this body. I cannot step outside of my body and encounter the world, right? I am limited to experiencing the world through my subjective consciousness. My consciousness cannot be teased out from my body. My consciousness cannot be understood independently of the body. The body is how I process this information. And remember, when we say body, it's the totality of the body. It's not just the brain, right? Consciousness cannot be reduced to an organ. You might not realize this, you might not know this, but you as a human being, you have more neurons in your intestines than a dog has in its brain. Think about that for a moment, right? You think a dog is smart. You have more neurons in your intestines than a dog has in its entire brain. And the neurons in your intestines communicate with the neurons in your brain. So whenever we talk about embodied consciousness, we're clearly not just talking about the brain, right? Because you have neurons all throughout your body, and they all communicate with one another through what is known as the enteric nervous system. Now, everybody's heard of the central nervous system, but you have this entire other nervous system called the enteric nervous system. Now, of course, Maurice Merleau-Ponty did not know any of this in 1945. But that's why we're looking at Maurice Merleau-Ponty as sort of anticipating all of these theories of mind that have been developing in the last 20 or so years. Maurice Merleau-Ponty was already thinking about this in 1945. So the Lebenswelt, the lived world, which is a fundamental ground of our being and consciousness, right? You can't separate those two. I am a thing in the world that is experiencing the world at the same time. You cannot tease out the subject from the object. Subjectivity and objectivity co-create consciousness. I am conscious of the world at one and the same time that I am a body in the world. Okay, so that's what we mean there by this unified experience of yourself. You are an entity that is in the world, and at the same time you are aware of the world. That is the combination of subjectivity and objectivity that Maurice Merleau-Ponty is going to be arguing for. So scrolling down now, these two, this blue and yellow highlighted paragraph is John Chafee's interpretation of what Maurice Merleau-Ponty was saying there, and that indented and italicized passage. And over here are my marginal notes explaining what John Chafee was explaining about Maurice Merleau-Ponty. So I'm just going to be talking about my marginal notes here. And again, part of this is for the purpose of review. Recall that for Kant, the phenomenal world is secondary to the noumenal world. So Kant's distinction between the phenomena and the noumena. The noumena, that's the Ding an sich, that is the thing unto itself. And remember what Kant says, is that we don't have access to that. We only have access to the phenomena. But that transcendental aspect of Kant's argument, the fact that we are able to have a phenomenon, which is the experience, right, presupposes the existence of that actual reality. You cannot have virtual reality if there isn't an actual reality, right? The virtual reality is parasitic upon an actual reality. If we don't have an actual reality, then there's nothing for us to have an experience of, right? So I cannot step outside and go beyond of my experiences. I'm limited to my experiences, but just because I'm limited to my experiences doesn't mean that I can't know that there's an object in itself, the noumenon. So when back to this, Kant thinks that the noumenal world is what is most real, right? The world of phenomenon, that is just a shadow of representation of this actual world, the noumenal world. It's the noumenal world that is most real. I just can't say anything about it, right? Other than the fact that I know it's there. In the phenomenal world for Kant, which is secondary and subsidiary to the noumenal world. So the noumenal world, that's the world as it actually is. That's primary, that's fundamental for Kant. And then I construct my own reality through the phenomenological world, right? Maurice Merleau-Ponty reverses that. He reverses that order. For Maurice Merleau-Ponty, it is the phenomenal world, the world of our embodied experience, right? I'm not experiencing the world as a spirit. I'm not experiencing the world as a disembodied mind. I am experiencing the world as an embodied consciousness. It's not just my brain, it is the totality of my body, right? Again, we have more neurons in our intestines than the dog has in its entire brain. And so you cannot reduce consciousness to one organ, to one physical organ. Consciousness is something that happens as a result of our bodies interacting with other bodies. And that's what accounts for the experience of objects and also the objects of experience. I'm gonna scroll down here and talk about this next little asterisk that I added. So these paragraphs here is what, that's just John Chafee sort of explaining what Maurice Merleau-Ponty is going to be advocating and the methodology that he's going to be advocating. I'm been going about 20 or so minutes, so I'm going to wrap this up and just talk about this little blue highlighted passage here. Now, again, this is John Chafee talking about Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Consciousness for Merleau-Ponty is a dimension of our lived body, right? That is le corps propre, not le corps objectif, which is just a physical thing, an organ, a body. That's not how we experience the world. We do not experience the world as a physical entity. We have that aspect to us, right? Clearly we have bodies, but there's a difference between the mere body and how we use the body to experience the world. So for consciousness is a dimension of the lived body. So the lived body in and of itself, the body in and of itself rather, does not account for consciousness. That's a pure physicalist view. Maurice Merleau-Ponty obviously accepts some portions of physicalism. We have bodies. He doesn't deny that, right? He's not an idealist. He said, well, clearly we have bodies, but we're not mere bodies. We don't inhabit bodies. We live in bodies that are themselves living in a world. That's the embodied nature of consciousness. Again, that dialectic between objectivity and subjectivity. Consciousness is the dimension of our lived body, which is not an object in the world, distinct from a knowing object, right? That's his rejection of Descartes, but is the subject's own point of view on the world. I am an embodied consciousness that is in the world. So the world is out there, right? Maurice Merleau-Ponty takes that as a given. Descartes begins by saying that we can doubt the existence of the world and has to sort of construct this epistemology that demonstrates that it exists. Again, Maurice Merleau-Ponty rejects that process, that methodology altogether. He just takes the world as a beginning point. I am an entity that is inhabiting the world and experiencing the world, and hence I have subjectivity, and I'm aware of objects, but I'm also an object myself in the world for somebody else to perceive. So to go back consciousness is not an object in the world, distinct from a knowing subject, but is the subject's own point of view on the world. The body is itself the original knowing subject from which all other forms of knowledge derive. So the body is necessary, but the body itself is not what constitutes consciousness. Consciousness is the result of this interplay between you and the world. And how you experience the world is through your body. Not one particular organ of it, not one particular physical aspect of it, but the embodied self is how you go about experiencing the world. And that's what we actually have access to, and that's what allows us to capture the nature of our experience. So hopefully what I've said has helped you to understand the reading assignment. There's also that very good external resource by Professor Ellie Anderson, in which she talks about Maurice Merleau-Ponty's arguments as presented in his book, The Phenomenology of Perception. So with all those things being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring this video to a close, and I will see you in the next video.